Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you for another episode. Today is going to be simple. We're going to be talking Red Rocks. So if you're looking for football or basketball or anything else, that's not going to be this episode. We're going to do our regularly scheduled one on Wednesday-ish. And we'll talk, we're going to talk basketball transfer portal. We'll talk the spring football. We're a little over halfway now, and so we'll get a little bit more of that action going on, and we'll do that. But today's episode solely is going to be about the Red Rocks. So if you couldn't care less about Utah gymnastics, go ahead and skip this episode. If you do care about Utah gymnastics, this one is going to be for you, maybe. I don't know. I think this one is going to be interesting, and we're going to get into that. So before we do that, let me tell you about our partners at Canyon View Credit Union. Big dreams don't just belong in your imagination. At Canyon View Credit Union, we help turn those dreams into reality. From application to celebration, we're by your side every step of the way, because home isn't just a place, it's the people you share it with. At Canyon View Credit Union, flexible options and expert guidance help you create a home that's truly yours, the perfect place to gather and belong. Guiding you home, Canyon View Credit Union. To learn more details, visit canyonviewcu.com. All right, like I said, we're just going to jump right into this one because yesterday being Sunday, was the regional finals for gymnastics. So this is the last chance before you can make it to nationals. Top two teams from each regional final make it to nationals. So 8 teams qualify and move on. And for the first time in 50 years, yes, 50 years, the Red Rocks did not advance. They are the only program in the country that had been to every nationals in its history. This has been something that has been a Red Rock staple, and it's something that Utah is just not used to not being a part of. And we're going to get into why all this took place. There's a lot of different things that take place here. But we're just going to recap real briefly what took place on Sunday. Obviously, a heartbreaker for the Red Rocks and the program. And there's been a lot of emotion, on Twitter, other platforms. We're getting a lot of feedback. I apparently do not like opinions, according to some people, and want to just silence that. So this is your opportunity to listen to my opinion without necessarily. I guess you can't fight back. You can fight back on Twitter. You do that anyway. So, look, my opinion doesn't ultimately matter here, simply because my job is just to report on this. But I'm also trying to give some perspective and try to give some insight into maybe why Utah is where they're at. So, the streak comes to an end. As I said, 49 straight. The 50th would have been awesome. Just a kind of a round number to be able to go out there. But there's a lot of difficulty that goes into this, and so we're going to jump into that. So first, the way that it shook out here, let me switch screens here so you can see it a little better, is the Red Rocks, they score 197.5, which by all accounts is a pretty solid score. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the scores here. UCLA topped the scores with a 197.725, and Minnesota, a team that was ranked 13th, finished in second to advance to nationals with a 197.625. Quite honestly, Minnesota just came out of nowhere. It's not that they weren't capable of doing this, but this was one of their highest meets of the season. It was one of those that just from the jump, they were on fire. And you could tell that there was a different mentality there. And unfortunately for the Red Rocks, they just couldn't compete and live up to that. So it's a tough opportunity here. Coming into this regional final, the Red Rocks did win the regional semifinals. They actually had the top score among all of the teams that were competing in the regional semifinals. So that's 8 teams, including UCLA and Minnesota. The Red Rocks had a 197.5 as well, and they were the 4th highest among the Sweet 16 teams. So the teams advancing to the regional finals, the Red Rocks had the 4th highest score. So this is not one of those situations where the Red Rocks were just out of their league. They weren't able to do what they needed to. They were in contention, right? And so they had the scores to be able to put up. The problem is everything just kind of combined on Sunday where the Red Rocks couldn't do what they needed to. And you had 2 teams in UCLA and Minnesota that just absolutely took advantage of it. So Tough situation there. This was considered what's, quote, the death regional. This was the hardest regional in all of the regionals where, it's a tough opportunity because you're going up against teams that are incredibly challenging. You've got UCLA at 4, you had Alabama at 5. Alabama was, hot or cold at times, but consistently throughout the season they were up there and ranked 5th in the country. And then, like I said, Minnesota ranked 13th, and they end up moving on. So, a tough situation for the Red Rocks. Just a little context here. The Red Rocks had they, had this isn't how it works. So I'm just throwing this out there. But had the Red Rocks just been in a giant pool with every team in the top 8 scores advanced to nationals, like I said, that's not how it works. It's the top 2 from each regional. The Red Rocks would have been in. What happened is the Red Rocks had a 197.5, as I mentioned. That would have been a higher score than Arkansas, which had a 197.450 to advance, as well as Stanford, which had a 197.225. So once again, use that as context to kind of let you know that as frustrating as it is to be able to miss out on getting to nationals, the Red Rocks were in contention. This is not something where they were just completely out of their depth. They weren't in there. This is a situation where they absolutely were in contention. They just happened to find themselves in a really tough regional, and that's the nature of it, right? That's how the cookies crumble. That's what happens, and it's a challenge. So let that be some context, because I've heard some hot takes, and we're going to get into a lot of those takes. I'm going to try to give you some context to it, but that's kind of how it is. Looking at it, so the Red Rocks, they started on bars yesterday, and the bars, it started out okay. It wasn't spectacular. It wasn't terrible as well, but you did have to count a 9.775 by Abby Risman because Ella Zerbes got a 9.75. What took place was Ella, on her last handstand, she kind of had to fight it a little bit, was kind of, moving a little to the side. And then on her dismount, she landed chest down and had to take a step, which is going to be a major deduction. And so they had to drop her score, but that left Abby Risman, I think she took a step, if I remember correctly, that didn't really fully work. And so that limited Utah's chances of being able to have a high score. With that said, though, Anna Patarariu as well as Avery Neff completely closed out that event in a high note. Anna got a 9.9, and then Avery Neff got a 9.95. I mean, she just absolutely did phenomenal on that event. She's been, consistent, obviously has done really well there. But this is how it started. And so everything was okay there. But at the same time, you fall into third place. We're just going to recap this quickly. I know anybody that watched this, I don't want to get too crazy into this. Next, you move on to beam. Another situation where it starts out okay. Elizabeth Gantner got a 9.85. She's been consistent all season, does really well, starts things off for the Red Rocks, okay? Ella Zerbes, once again, just kind of really struggled in these regionals. She's been so consistent all season, and for whatever reason, these last two, she just had little missteps that ended up causing problems. She's a phenomenal gymnast and deserves to be able to have a ton of praise heaped on her. This is not her fault. She just had 2 mishaps that took place, right? It happens. But she ends up having to jump off the beam after her acro series. She just lost balance and had to jump off, and so her score was a 9.3. So following that, you had the Red Rocks, who had to basically hit on every other routine to be able to stay in contention. And they do okay. You do get 2 9.9s from McKenna Smith and Avery Neff, and then you get a 9.8 from Cami Winger and a 9.85 from Abby Risman. So solid, but still the lowest score of the meet with a 49.3, and that pushed Utah into 4th place. During that time, you also have Minnesota, Alabama, UCLA, all doing really well. This was a really tight competition, and all 3 programs continued to bring it in those first 2 rotations. And so you're looking at this as a Red Rocks fan, wondering, what's happening. Utah's suddenly in last place, and it didn't necessarily look like a good situation for the Red Rocks to be in. There wasn't a lot of opportunities there to be able to move forward, just simply because a lot of missteps, things that weren't happening well. Even on bars, talking previously, they weren't getting the sticks that they were used to. You kind of had to take a step, or things just didn't work out the way you needed to. And so you missed a few things out there that you could have normally had. And so, tough situation. Well, you move on to floor. And floor is where the Red Rocks absolutely changed the rhetoric. They come out there and throw a 49.525, absolutely dynamic opportunity, especially given that Sarah Crump started out with a 9.775. She had a little bit of misstep as she was, competing on the floor, and the Red Rocks once again had to continue to dominate. And quite honestly, floor hasn't been the most consistent all season. And so the fact that they did this and this was their highest one, I don't want to call it crazy because they definitely have the potential to do this, but it's been their most inconsistent all season long. And so to have that really showcases kind of what this team was capable of if they could hit on their regular three events that they've done well on. Well, Zoe Johnson goes out there, gets a 9.85. Avery steps it up with a 9.9, and then three consecutive gymnasts, Ella Zerbez, so she bounces back, McKenna Smith, and Sage Curtis, the freshman, in her only event, they each get a 9.925. And so suddenly Utah goes from last place to first place because Minnesota had some, issues. UCLA had a little bit of issues. Alabama suddenly started to tank a little bit, not quite tank, but it wasn't staying in contention. And suddenly you're going into that final rotation and everything is looking okay, right? Like you're looking at this and saying, okay, maybe the Red Rocks have a chance. They're going on their last event, the vault, which has been consistently their best event of the season. Everything's looking up. As long as they can continue to maintain that, Utah should advance to nationals. It was going to be you're going to sweat it out. You're going to be a little nervous, but at the same time, things were going to be okay. Well, fast forward to vault, and the first gymnast, Cami Winger, she sits down. She tried to go for the stick and just unfortunately couldn't hold on and has to sit down. So once again, that puts the Red Rocks a little behind, and suddenly they have to hit on all five gymnasts, which, look, they're capable of doing, but it leaves little room for error, especially if somebody, has to take a big step or they're a little off balance or they don't hit the table the correct way. Suddenly you now have to be able to count every single score because you can't rely on a 9.225 to be able to get you into nationals. Well, Ella Zerbez, once again, after her first two events, after she really struggled with those, she comes back and she dominates these last two. She gets a 9.9, gets a stick, everything's great. Zoe Johnson, she gets a 9.8. She has to take a step, and suddenly, you've limited it, but it's a 9.8. You're okay. Well, McKenna Smith comes out there and throws a 9.95 in her last collegiate event because she's a senior. And so she gets that 9.95. Great opportunity for her to end. It's just unfortunate that, she wasn't able to continue on, but really showcases what Utah's capable of in this event. And so you're thinking, okay, if the next two, Ashley Glenn and Avery Neff, can continue, everything is going to be okay. Well, Ashley Glenn, she ends up scoring a 9.8 as well. She has to take a big step forward. She gets a little bit too much momentum, and that limits her score. And then Avery Neff, she has to take a tiny hop forward and gets a 9.9. It's a solid score. Maybe I don't think it was underscored by any means, but it was close. She's gotten higher scores off of a little hop like that. But now you're sitting there waiting with a 49.350. That left Utah in first place, but you knew based on how everything else was going that it was going to be a battle for the Red Rocks to hold on. And unfortunately for them, UCLA and Minnesota had the event of their night. It was their best rotation. Both teams scored a team high in their individual events. UCLA, which it's UCLA is known for floor. This is what they go for. They end with a 49.625 on floor. It ends with Jordan Childs, the very last gymnast to compete, getting a perfect 10. I mean, it was just storybook ending for her and her dynamic career, and whether it be the Olympics, whether it be in the collegiate career, just a great opportunity to be able to see her dominate in her sport. And so it was UCLA instantly jumping to first place. Okay, that's fine. By that point, you knew that the Red Rocks weren't going to advance. But something like that, if UCLA goes off, it's great. Minnesota on beam, they were just electric. They score 49.525. And the difference between Minnesota and Utah specifically was they were getting their sticks. And so every single time that they would do their events, their rotations, they would get their sticks, whereas Utah, would have to take a step or do different things that way. And so suddenly you find yourself being so close. Let's go back to that score here if you're on YouTube. So close to being there. If you get two sticks or you get certain things, some of those 9-8-5 or 9-8 scores changed to a 9-9, which Utah was more than capable of in those situations, you're now in contention and you're potentially even challenging UCLA with a 9-7-7, right? And so you're just that close. You're that close to being off, and tough situation for the Red Rocks. I mean, it's not that they weren't competitive. The problem has been, and it was especially early on this season, that when they got in these types of meets, things changed a little bit, and they couldn't get to, it's not that they couldn't get to that level. There was these little missteps where, maybe it's the mental block, or maybe there's something there where things changed, where you go from having that stick to suddenly having to take a step. And that seems minor, but it meant the whole world, because suddenly now you don't have an opportunity to compete at nationals. So yes, Utah goes in. They have a very competitive. I mean, all five of those scores are competitive. Even Alabama to 197, 175 would at least push, like I said, Stanford, right? Stanford would have advanced against Alabama, but they would have pushed them, right? And so you had a very tough regional. Things just didn't break out for the Red Rocks, and suddenly, you're on the outside looking in for the first time in history. And because of that, there's been several takes, and we're going to get into that just in a second. First off, based on individual performances, Avery Neff will be moving on to nationals as an all-arounder. So you do get to see her again. You get to see her compete in Fort Worth. Obviously, a dynamic athlete. She brings it. She's done really well. You also get Ella Zerbes, who will be competing on floor as an individual gymnast, as well as Anna Padareriu, who will be competing on balance beam. Yes. So you do get three gymnasts that will be going to nationals, but you're not going to have the full team, which, like I said, is an unusual experience for the Red Rocks to be in. And so just, an interesting situation. Not easy. It's not something that anybody wanted to be a part of. And naturally, the first question that everybody's going to have is Carly Dockendorf on the hot seat. Now, I gave my take on this on Twitter, and if you're on Twitter, you can see it. I think it's a crazy take to say she's on the hot seat. Now, if you want to say it's warming up, sure. I can agree with that to some extent, because anybody that doesn't reach a certain level is going to be on a hot seat to some level. I still don't think that she's anywhere near being a scorching or even close to it really being hot. This is 1 year. It's not something that is I don't know. Like it's not something that happens a ton, right? And the fact that the Red Rocks have been consistent for 49 straight years kind of shows that they've been okay. And sure, you can say, okay, well, she was the first one to lead a team to not making it, right? It goes so much more into that, and it's not quite that easy to say, oh well, she's on the hot seat because they missed out on a very tough regional and weren't able to get in there. So let's jump into this. I'm going to go through some of these complaints that relate to her being on the hot seat. Once again, I think that's a crazy take. You're more than welcome to have that opinion. That's my personal take. I'm going to give a little bit of context to it to kind of help you understand a little bit of this stuff. And I understand, why a lot of people are going to feel this, especially after 49 years of dominance, right? The sport has changed a ton. The Red Rocks haven't won a national title in a very long time. It was in the 90s, right? And so there's a lot of desire to get back there, but the sport has changed drastically from that time, where it's not that the Red Rocks weren't dominant, they were, but there's been so much more emphasis to improve gymnastics all around that it's becoming much more challenging. Regionals have become much more challenging to be able to advance. And so each year it was always a challenge to be able to get there. If you remember last year, a couple years ago, there were very close chances where the Red Rocks weren't going to compete. So it's not like this is just Carly. This is a challenge every single year, especially when they changed this back in about 2018, after the 2018 season, where you go into these different regionals this way, and it's a little different in how it's done. So that's what it is. So let's jump into this. The regionals lately. Let's take a look back on some of their scores, as what the Red Rocks have scored. So last year, to get into nationals, the Red Rocks scored a 197.650. Okay, pretty solid score. That's where, they were close to that. If they hit, that's probably about where they're at. 2024, 197, 575. So not much different than this year. That's what takes place. It is. 2 years, 2023 and 2022, are an absolute scorcher. These are phenomenal seasons, and you've never had a regionals like this. And so, you can say, okay, well, Utah was peaking and everything was going well under Tom Farden, and everything, was great, and Utah's trajectory was on the upward. Sure. But there was also some other situations that it wasn't just that. It was also, you had a lot of veteran leaders. You had a lot of people in there that had been, competing in, let's say, all around or on their events for years. The Red Rocks this year didn't have that. And we're going to get into that roster makeup here shortly. But this is what the difference is between a veteran team and one that it has veterans somewhat and more of a younger team. Okay. So you get those 2 years. The highest was 2022 with the 198.2. Incredible effort. Honestly, should have probably won a national title that year, just kind of fell out short in nationals. That's a different issue that, you can get into. 2021, 197, 925. And I'm not going to go through every season here, but kind of showing where it is. And then in 2019, 197, 250. This is the first year of the regionals change, and the Red Rocks advanced on a 197, 250. So once again, context, 197.5 is not a bad score for the Red Rocks. And yes, judging and scoring have gone up every single year over the last few years. I understand that, right? But the point being that the Red Rocks have advanced on lower scores. A 197.5, especially at regional finals, is a good score. Beyond that, anything 2018 and below, the Red Rocks, their highest score, let's see, was a 197.475. Anything below that, or any year below that, is below the 197.475. So once again, 197.5 is more than capable of being able to get to nationals. Okay, so it's not like the Red Rocks have had all this long time of they've had all these high scores and suddenly this is a down year because of that. Yes, there was some upward momentum in regionals. I get that in terms of the last few years, but it's not Carly, right? It's not that. It's more about the roster makeup and where that takes place. So that leads me into the next point that I've heard many times from other people who are frustrated with Carly. And once again, this is your opinions, and you're more than welcome to have that. Gymnastics is a tough sport, and this is the nature of it. But one of the other retorts that I've heard is that Carly is not recruiting well. So let's throw up another graphic here. Let's switch it to that. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see this. I'll go over it. This is the recruiting classes that let's see, where am I? Oh, I screwed that up. I screwed up my graphic. I apologize. For some reason, I had. Oh well. If you're watching on YouTube, my apologies. Ignore the 2027 class right there. What happened? I think I was fixing something, and that got in there weird. So, anyways, we're gonna start with 2024 class, which I always hate the way that gymnastics has to say this because 2024 class is actually they're competing in 2025, and so it kind of throws me off. So you can see this as kind of the gymnasts that competed for the first time as freshmen in 2025. So this is the last year of Tom Farden's recruiting. This is the class that they came in with a head coach being fired, or not fired, but walking away, and suddenly kind of trying to figure out the situation, and then moving on from that, it's Carly, right? Now, Carly was absolutely integral in this, and so that was, part of this, but you can consider that the Tom Farden type recruiting class. So, but I'm throwing this in here because you do get Avery Neff, kind of a talented gymnast if you haven't heard. Number 1 overall in the country, 5 stars. You get Zoe Johnson, number 9 overall, another 5-star. You get Clara Raposo, 5-star. She was injured late this season, so she wasn't able to continue to compete. That did hurt the Red Rocks. And then you get 4-star Poppy Stickler. The rest of those are on there for some reason. Avery, I was changing something, and she's not on there. And it also says 2027 class if you're watching on YouTube, so I apologize on that. But that would be the 2024 class there. Like I said, Avery Neff, top of the class. Okay, so you can say, okay, that's Tom Farden's, whatever. Carly was still a part of that, and she was the one that was a big, recruiter of that group. Next, you have the 2025 class, which was the gymnasts that were performing for the first time this year as freshmen, so 2026. You get 5-star Bailey Stroud. She was number 9 in the country. Then you get a 5-star Abby Rissman, 4-star Nora Christian, and 3-star Sage Curtis. Now, this class, Bailey started out strong. This was a class where every single freshman came into this, and there was a lot of talk about how talented they could be. The problem with freshmen is that they're inexperienced. They haven't competed in this level before, and so it's not that they haven't competed at a high level, but they haven't competed in a team environment where everybody's working together. It's a lot of individuality, whether you're performing in elite or whatever that may be. You've been competing more as an individual, and so it's coming together as a team and doing it that way. Where now you do that, you come in, and there was a lot of conversation about these 4 gymnasts being able to push every single gymnast out there outside of maybe Avery, right? Bailey comes in, she's instantly in the starting unit for many events. She was in some all around, like, unfortunately for her, her dominance in practice didn't necessarily translate to the competition floor. And so they had to make a switch. Carly had to make a switch to kind of take her out to kind of build her confidence. And so you didn't see much of her at all late in the season, but she is more than capable of being able to be an all arounder moving forward. She's absolutely dynamic in what she does. It's just trying to kind of work through maybe be nerves or whatever have you to be able to get there. Abby Rissman obviously showcased herself this year in a lot of facets, pulled out many clutch performances to be able to help this team. She's a rising talent for this Red Rocks team. You can see the future there. Nora Christian, she was injured, and she had a very serious injury that kept her out the entirety of the season. There was a chance that they could potentially get her back, but it wasn't worth it. And so they decided to redshirt her so that she could have a full year. So you do get 4 full seasons of her, but there's a lot of conversation about her as well being an absolute dominant gymnast and somebody that they're really excited about who can come in there and be a great gymnast for this team. This isn't just talk. This is somebody that has done it. She's done really well, and they look forward to her. And then lastly, you get Sage Curtis, who 3-star, but she absolutely kind of came on strong. The fact that she was able to be in the floor the way that she did really showcases her talent. And there's a lot of optimism that she can continue to grow too. So still a really solid class for the 2025 class. And so not really that you could argue that is Carly's first full recruiting class. Okay. Next, you get the 2026 class. So this is the gymnast that will be coming in this fall, who will then be competing as freshmen next year for the 2027 season. Once again, another 5-star. Red Rocks haven't lost their 5-stars, y'all. And this is something that Carly continues to work on. This is not something that that the Red Rocks are falling back on, right? Gabrielle Black, number 7 gymnast in the country. She comes in as a 5-star. Okay. More of that. We have to see that, but still a dominant athlete. You then get 4-star Ayla Miller and 3-star Madison Denlinger. Really solid class. We'll see what happens. But so far the recruiting hasn't dropped off there. Let's transition over to the next year. These are the gymnasts that are committed that will sign this year that they haven't committed yet or put pen to paper, so to speak, but they are on the docket to be able to be the 2027 recruiting class, which would compete in 28. Yes, this is a long time, but once again, this showcases the recruiting and the argument that the Red Rocks aren't recruiting well. This class is led by 5-star Claire Peace, who is currently the number 3 gymnast in the country. It doesn't sound like they're dropping off too much. Then there's 5-star Galil, I'm probably saying this name, Galil Vestins. I'm gonna have to learn that one. I haven't done very well with that name. She is number, man, I'm really screwed up on this one. She is number 6 overall. I put a number 3 there. Do better with your graphics, Josh. Like, come on, man. Apologize for YouTube. This is what happens when you start putting these things late at night and trying to get things well. Either way, you got that. And then you got 4-star Emma Howells, who currently is ranked number 17. Those are going to change because they haven't fully filled out the 2027 class. But these 3 gymnasts are still pretty high in the entire country in terms of recruiting. So for those of you that say that recruiting is dead, that the Red Rocks haven't been able to recruit the right athletes based off of rankings, based off of every imaginable metric that you can get outside of just knowing for a guarantee that a gymnast will hit, which you can't guarantee, the Red Rocks have continued to recruit well and are still continually recruiting. So it's not like there's this loss of faith in Carly, and suddenly they don't believe in the coaching staff, and everything has changed. And it wasn't the same way with Tom Farden or the Marstons. Like, no, they're continually doing well. The fact that you continually get 5-star recruits near the top, it may not be Avery Neff number one, but Claire Peace is number three. So that's an argument that I'm not going to buy. Simple facts, right? Like, you can get in there and say that recruiting is on a downward trend, and it's not. It's simply not, because the Red Rocks continue to recruit at a high level. Lastly, I've heard argument that the team has gotten worse. Now, this is a caveat that you can't exactly quantify in some respects, right? Like, I can't come out there and say this is what it is. The reality is coming into this season, the Red Rocks were made up exactly split of 4 seniors, 4 juniors, 4 sophomores, 4 freshmen. Not all of those gymnasts compete at the same level, so it's not always that dispersed, right? Your veterans of this team, the ones that have consistently performed at a high level, at least as a senior, you're going to have McKenna Smith and Anna Pautareriu. Both did phenomenally well. Unfortunately for McKenna, she kind of had some issues on beam this year. They changed her beam, and it just wasn't working out to compete at it. And so they had to pull her off of beam, and so she wasn't in the all-around. She's always been consistent there. This is an event that she's always been able to dominate at. But look, you get mental blocks sometimes, right? You saw Simone Biles at the Olympics get the twisties, and things change. Like, gymnastics is a mental sport, and things change drastically at times. And so McKenna tried to be able to perform on beam, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't something that she could consistently do. That didn't mean that she wasn't a talented gymnast, but you do lose that opportunity to have somebody that has competed at a high level on beam, because for whatever reason, it just wasn't working out for her this year. That's not a coaching issue. It's simply because, she couldn't get it done. She's more than talented to be able to do that. You saw that on vault. You saw that on bars. You saw that on floor. Everybody loves her floor, right? That's a veteran leader, and she does well. Anna Pautareriu is in 2 events, and she consistently performed. There were some, you might get some mistakes every once in a while, but she was another staying force that helped this team to move them forward. Outside of that, you have a lot more gymnasts that are underclassmen, except for Ella Zerbez, who consistently produced this year, especially really dominant athlete. Unfortunately, just had some missteps in the regionals. Once again, that happens, right? Like, she's consistently performed. You're going to rely on Ella 9 times out of 10. There's not anything about her game or her gymnastics that you would not rely on. So let's say you've got that. You've got 3 gymnasts ultimately that are veterans, that have been on this team for a while, that have done this. Outside of that, everybody is underclassmen. And I understand that gymnastics don't always work the same way as, let's say, football or men's basketball or women's basketball, where it takes you a while to get in. These gymnasts have been competing at a high level forever. But at the same time, there's a difference between having veteran leaders. When you are stocked with veterans, there's a stabilizing force that allows you to say, hey, we've seen this time and time again. With that said, yes, you do have Avery Neff. She's built differently. There's a reason why she was the number 1 gymnast in the country. She's just built differently, and she does that. But she's not the one that you're going to worry about. Beyond that, it's kind of a hodgepodge of gymnasts who have been up and down, right? Whether it be sophomores, even juniors, or freshmen who are trying to consistently get in there. And that's kind of the part where the Red Rocks struggled, where things weren't always consistent, whether it's trying to understand the moment, trying to understand what you need to do. This is where the team was young. And by and large, you had a consistent base on most events because of your veterans, as well as Avery Neff and yada, yada, yada. But you had a lot of inconsistencies because you were relying a lot on freshmen. You were putting them in a lot of tough positions early on, which, you needed to, but you found out early that you couldn't fully rely on them. Carly tried to throw in Bailey. She put in Abby. She put in Sage. You're putting these gymnasts early into it, and they did impact the team, but unfortunately, it just wasn't always consistent. And that's the hard part with this, is trying to learn and grow. Being a freshman is a very difficult experience. You're traveling for the first time in terms of being with the team and having to still deal with the college life. And yes, a lot of these gymnasts have traveled for individual events, especially if you're in the elite world. but at the same time, this is a completely different experience. And so you're probably outside of home for the first time. This is a tough experience for them. And so to do all that while still competing at a high level is a challenge. Okay. So you got that. On part of that, you have a team that was dubbed Team 50. There's no way getting around that. You are Team 50. You had the pressure of being able to be that team that gets to nationals for the 50th straight year. And early on, that got to this team. Quite honestly, it did. And they talked about it. They talked about how they were so focused on the team, which is great. You want a unit to be focused on the team, but at the same time, they stopped worrying about their individual performances. And in gymnastics, it's this weird dynamic where it's very individualized, but as a team. And so what happened is you had gymnasts, even let's say Avery Neff early on, she struggled because she was trying out some new routines that worked really well in practice. They just didn't translate into competition, and you had to change. And one of the conversations that I had with Avery is she said, I had to start focusing on myself. And that was a message that she and many other leaders of the team brought to each other and said, we have to focus on our individual gymnastics before we focus on our team, and then it all can come together. They had kind of a come to Jesus team players only meeting that allowed them to do that after those early, events in January that just quite honestly weren't up to the level of the Red Rocks. That's where you can have that frustration. But you had a lot of gymnasts working into it. You had a lot of gymnasts that were so focused on being Team 50 to get there that it put a lot of pressure on them. The reason why the Red Rocks did away with Twitter is part of that reason. The Gymternet can be a crazy place, as we've seen this last weekend because of them not making it. It can be a crazy place. And so there was an intention to say, we're getting off social media to kind of limit a lot of that aspect of what this team is being put through. And so it was just trying to control everything. And sure, you can say, oh, well, they're not mentally tough, whatever. Like you try to do that as people are telling you you're terrible at what you do, right? Like it's just not that easy. And so Carly did what she could to be able to get this team together. A little side note here. Carly is all about these gymnasts as individuals. She's not worried about results. And maybe, I mean, she is, don't get me wrong. Like she's absolutely worried about results. But whereas maybe some previous coaches, Tom Farden or even the Marstons to some extent, they're trying to push the limits and trying to get highest scores, which is absolutely needed. Carly is more about making them well-rounded individuals to help them so that they can have strong mentals, so that they can get in there and they can perform when it needs to. You've seen this from this team time and time again, where when adversity strikes, and unfortunately for this team, adversity struck a ton, they found ways to continue to fight. There's many meets this year where the first two events just absolutely stunk. They weren't up to snuff. You had a lot of errors, and then the Red Rocks found ways to be able to come on the back end and do well, right? That shows to that mental fortitude and working towards that of showing that this team can continue to grow. And as the season developed, Carly changed rotations to be able to help with that, still fine tuning it as the season progressed. And you started to slowly see this team build. Yes, they got a 198 this year, but you did see them consistently build each meet where every single meet seemingly was their best meet, either road or home or neutral, whatever that may have you, they continued to improve. That to me is coaching. That's what Carly is there for. The fact that this team started out so poorly in January and then got to where they needed to be today shows that Carly was coaching this team, that they were listening and she was doing her job. At the end of the day, Carly can't do anything for these gymnasts when they're in competition. She can't go out there and force them to get a stick. She can't force them to, not over rotate on bars or whatever have you. Like this is something that they have to rely on. She has to continue to coach them and get them to where they need to. They did. They improved. Was it to the level that you're used to? Probably not, but they were working through a lot of these issues. Another issue is you had a coach leave mid-season who stepped away for a personal matter. You can argue the team got better after that. Maybe there was a distraction there, and I'm not going to get into all the reasons for that. But you have, a team that came together after that and absolutely started to dominate. This is a team that continued to improve as the season progressed. Once again, coaching. You face early adversity, you continue to improve. You come into this where you win the regional semifinals, have the fourth highest score in the country, and then you just happen to be in a bad situation for regionals. That's what it is. I don't know what other better way to say that than that. But let's continue. So where did it all go wrong? Part of this is the change to the NQS system. This means in the past there were 6 scores from the season, your top highest scores. It had to be road, it had to be home, a certain number of it, and it accumulated and averaged out to be your NQS score. That's how it's been for a very long time. That's what the Red Rocks and everybody else is used to. That's not to say that this year was unfair because they hadn't had to do this. No, every team was in this. But what happened is the NQS system changed where it now includes 9 meets. So that means a lot more of your season is being counted, which is good and bad, because now if you do have bad meets, which the Red Rocks did, that is going to be counted in there, and you have to spend a lot of time working on improving that. Part of this, though, it counts on judging. And I'm going to sneeze here, and I apologize if I do. Excuse me. Part of this is on judging as well. And, you can talk about the SEC bias and kind of what that is. Unfortunately for gymnastics, it is a subjective sport. And there is this perception that the SEC is the dominant conference. It's hard to get away from that because there has been a lot of the dominant gymnastic teams there. It's also following with the trend that these top 2 conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, are taking the best talent. And so there's this perceived view that they're the best, right? Now, in gymnastics lately, that's been the case. Okay. And so it follows that. And so you're going to see much higher scores in the SEC than you are going to say in the Big 12. And quite honestly, I had an episode early on in the season that says the Big 12 is hurting the Red Rocks. I'll say that over and over and over again. The Big 12 is hurting the Red Rocks. And you can be frustrated with that if you're a fan of the Big 12. You can say that this is another one of those Utah bias where they don't want to be here. But the reality is it hurts the Red Rocks. So as part of this, with this NQS that changes now, you have 9 full meets that you have to count. The league has also changed it where they're trying to do away with Utah's advantage, quote unquote, advantage of being able to compete at the Maverick Center. Heaven forbid that an outlet decides to support gymnastics and give a great venue for teams, but they don't let them count the Maverick Center except for one as an away event to help their score because it's a quote unquote home meet for a lot of other teams, and so that becomes a challenge. But the reality is it's not. And the Red Rocks are literally the only program that has this experience for them. And so it's kind of the Red Rocks rule, right? Regardless. So you have these nine things. If the judging is low in one meet, which it takes place all the time, it becomes a challenge because now you're working to overcome that. Now you're already fighting that SEC bias where on week 1, week 2, the SEC is already throwing out 198 scores. And whether that's just because their gymnasts are better, I don't think so. You're seeing that when you get to regionals where the scores are much tighter. Now, yes, there were scores in the 198s. You saw LSU, Georgia, Florida, whatever it may have you. They're getting into those scores. Oklahoma is what I meant instead of Georgia, but you get what I'm saying. When you get these teams into equal-minded meets and when you get into nationals, those scores change, right? You see them on an equally level, and those judgings change. Unfortunately for the Red Rocks and any team out west, they don't get that benefit, maybe outside of UCLA. And Utah has gotten a benefit. So I don't want to sit here and clip this and say, okay, Utah's, never gotten a benefit. Utah has gotten the benefit of the doubt sometimes as well, and they get higher scores at times. I get that. But by and large, the scoring out west is so much lower than elsewhere. And so when you get this NQS system that's changed, that's one of the biggest drawbacks of that is, yes, it's counting the entirety of the season. And that's the same case for everybody. So you do have to be more consistent. And I think ultimately that's a good change. But the problem is when judging is inconsistent throughout the season in terms of conferences, you're suddenly playing behind, right? Whereas Utah's consistently been anywhere from 6 to 3 the last few years in the rankings. This year they found themselves in 12 and 13. That pushes you into a far different bracket in the regionals. If you look at the old system, the Red Rocks would have been 8th this year. Still not that level that they needed to be, but not terrible. They would have been 8th in the previous NQS system. That would have meant that they would have been competing with Oklahoma in the regional. Most likely, I'm assuming it would be in Tempe. I didn't figure it all out because I didn't want to go that crazy. But assuming that everything worked out that way and the way that it worked out, the standard of the 1, 8, 9, 16 teams competing in the same regional would have meant that Oklahoma, Utah, Michigan State, and Clemson would have been competing in the same regional. This is based on the old NQS system and everything there. So Utah jumps 4 spots, gets out of a precarious situation there. What would have happened here? These are the scores of the regional final. And I understand you can't fully take this because each regional final has its own, system and everything, and you're competing against them. But based on the regional final scores of the teams that were here, Oklahoma advances. We get that. 198-350 they got in the regional final. Crazy score. Oklahoma's been dominant. I still think they're overscored in that situation, but that's the nature of this. Utah gets their 197.5. They would have qualified for nationals under this regional final, right? Michigan State, which was ranked 9th in this system, got a 197 flat. Clemson, 197, 150. Still not getting there. That once again shows the scores of what it can be. So what happened is you had a lot of these early scores that really hurt the Red Rocks. And yes, this applies to everybody, so you can't boo-hoo this. But you can see when you had something like the early part of the season where you're competing at Iowa State, which quite honestly had faulty equipment. They shutter their program because they just didn't care about it. You have that. You had a situation in Denver where their floor is less than ideal. Like it's literally, indentations as the gymnasts go through it. Like it just was not an ideal situation. You're competing at some of these places where gymnastics just quite honestly hasn't been the same level as the SEC, Utah, UCLA, anywhere these other programs. And so you're suddenly behind because you're competing on different equipment. None of that is to be an excuse for the Red Rocks not competing because they have to still do it when they get there at the regional finals. I get that. But you can see how all of this kind of changes things for the Red Rocks, where you suddenly go from being in the death regional, where you're a 12 seed competing against a lot more similarly rated teams, to competing in a regional that, yes, Oklahoma's dominant. They're going to be dominant for a long time, but you get a much better chance of being able to move forward. Okay, so there's that. There was the reliance early on freshmen at the beginning of the season, and it took Carly some time to change that. But I think there's a difference here now where because the NQS is counted for a majority of the season, there's going to have to be a change in her coaching style to change how you move forward with that. Now, you can't falter to some extent because these gymnasts, these freshmen especially, were outdoing many other gymnasts on the floor, not the floor, excuse me, just the mat, just in generalities, than some of these others in practice. And so you go into competition thinking they're going to be okay. And when things didn't work out, that's what happens. It changes. You had injuries. Nora Christian, who was expected to be a dominant performer for the Red Rocks as well, was out. Clara Raposo, late in the season, she gets injured, and she'd been a consistent force all year for the Red Rocks, little up and down at times as well, but a higher level or a higher ceiling with Clara than maybe some other gymnasts on this team. Inconsistencies. This is a world where, there is just a lot of inconsistencies, and this is a whole team effort, but there was maybe some individual performances that didn't always consistently hit. And sometimes it was Cammie Winger, whether that be on beam or vault. You saw that on regional finals. And look, I'm not blaming her for this, but maybe a little bit more inconsistencies. McKenna Smith, we talked about on beam. If she could have worked into that and gotten back into that, regularly, you have an instantly higher score with her because she's done it for so long. Her first few years as a Red Rocks, she had never fallen off the beam. She was consistent. She was great. She scored high. Just for whatever reason, it didn't work out this year. Maybe it was a confidence issue because she did get pulled out early with the freshmen, whatever have you. On floor, Ashley Glenn was hit and miss. She kind of took a step back there on floor this year. Sarah Crump, you weren't going to get a max score with her in the leadoff spot. Her max score has always been a 985, and so you're instantly limited. Now, 985 is a great score, especially as a leadoff. So it's not a bad thing. But when that is basically your max score for her, any misstep from her, and suddenly you're now in the sevens, right? You saw that on Sunday, where her score was lower. There was a lot of these situations where the Red Rocks were trying to fill the need, and it just didn't come together the way that it needed to. And so you see these inconsistencies throughout the season. There wasn't a consistent force. You didn't have Miley O'Keefe or Grace McCallum, who were just these stabilizing forces consistently doing what they do every single week, where when they miss something, it's a rarity. You just didn't have that. You had much more of the gymnasts, excuse me, who were trying to work through things. And that's not to say any one of these gymnasts can't be a top gymnast or do it at a consistent level. Just this year, they had some struggles. And so all of that leads into this where you can be frustrated. You can be upset by how things are going. And I totally understand that. But to say that this is a reason for Carly to one be fired or to be on the hot seat is a pretty hot take. And I'll die on that hill. I think it's crazy that's the case. And I understand the expectations are high. I understand that you've lived in a world where the Red Rocks are one of the dominant teams in the country. Unfortunately, for the last 30-ish years, 25-ish years, the Red Rocks they have not won a national title. And so they've always been close, but not close enough. They've been second, they've been third. Like they're there, but it's not like this has been something where the Red Rocks lately have been rolling off national championships and suddenly Carly comes in and the program's tanked and you're missing regional or you're missing the nationals. Like this is par for the course in a lot of respects. Like I said, you were in a death regional, you had a tough situation going on. There's a lot of inconsistencies throughout the season. And yet, despite all that, you had the Red Rocks improve. So I don't know what else I can say to that. I know it's not easy. I know it's, frustrating. I know the emotions are rough there, but at the same time, this is a team that's going to continue to fight. You're going to have much more leadership in terms of experience next year. Just gymnasts that have gone through it more and more consistently. That takes time, right? And by the time that, some of these are juniors or seniors, by the time Avery Neff is a senior, you would have to assume that a majority of this team is pretty veteran and they've had a lot of experience and they've done a lot of good. But it's just one year where it happens, right? On the bright side, you don't have that streak hanging over your head anymore. These gymnasts can just go out and enjoy it. And yeah, you don't want to be the team that goes and misses for the second straight year. That's a disaster. Then you can start having a longer conversation about that, in my opinion. But I think the Red Rocks are in a good spot. It's not all doom and gloom. I understand it's frustrating. It's tough. But go celebrate your gymnasts in the nationals who did make it, Avery Neff, Ella Zerbes, and Ana Patarariu, but it's not all doom and gloom. And like I'm not sitting here to carry the bag of the Red Rocks. Like they can do what they need to. There's things that need to improve, obviously. Carly's going to look at this and say she needs to improve. It's frustrating to her as well. But it's not a situation where I think the Red Rocks are doomed or that they're not living up to their expectations. It's really, well, by default, they're not living up to their expectations, but it's not that they're not capable of being there. Once again, they had a score that was capable of being in nationals. If you want to have a deeper conversation about why the Red Rocks can't get it done in nationals, that's a different conversation. And that's carried through for the last 25 years. But at the same time, this is not a bad situation for the Red Rocks. It's just unfortunate that they weren't able to keep that streak alive. So maybe it's talking you off the ledge. Maybe I didn't do anything to help you. I hope I did. But that's a little context of to why that is. Look, there's so many other factors in gymnastics that can go into this. I'm not fully equipped to get into everything. There's so many more people smarter in gymnastics than me. I try to do my best. It's a sport that I've been learning for the last few years, and so I'm doing my best to understand it. But at the same time, being close to these gymnasts, being close to Carly, being all these people, like getting conversations with them, they're close. They understand it. They're more aware of this than you are. They understand it. They live it. They breathe it. They want to perform their best as well. They're high level gymnasts that can do it. It's just a matter of where they were at the time and the season of adversity that really struck. So with that, that's where we're going to end with the talk on the Red Rocks. We're going to come back later this week to talk about transfer portal for basketball. That's opened up, so we've got a lot of conversations about that. Well, some conversations about that. And then we're going to continue to hit with spring football. We get an opportunity to see football again tomorrow as media, so we'll kind of get some takeaways from that, see what's going on, how things are moving forward. There was a spring scrimmage on Saturday. The media was not a part of that, but we're going to get a conversation about that as well. So we will dive into that. So tune in later this week to hear that. And that's it for today's episode. I appreciate you listening, and I hope you have a great day.